She carried a mop and a quiet dignity he had never bothered to notice. He was Kang Jae-won, ruthless, untouchable, the kind of man Seoul whispered about and feared. The day he fired her, he didn't even look at her face. But 6 months later, when his 2 children sat across from him at the dinner table, silent and hollow-eyed, and the eldest said softly, "We want Mary back, Appa." Something cracked open inside his chest that no amount of power, money, or blood had ever managed to reach. He didn't know yet that chasing her would cost him everything. He only knew that he couldn't stop. Welcome to Afrokorea TV. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Kang estate sat on the northern edge of Seoul, like a fortress that had forgotten how to breathe. Tall black gates, security cameras at every angle, manicured hedges cut with military precision. Inside, the marble floors were cold even in summer, the hallways long enough to swallow sound, and the air always faintly scented with something sterile, like a place that hosted power but had never quite learned how to hold warmth. Mary Adiz had worked there for 14 months. She arrived each morning at 6:30, moving through the estate with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned early that invisibility was a form of protection. She was 27 years old, tall and full-figured, with deep brown skin, wide expressive eyes, and a mouth that curved easily into a smile, though not in this house. Not often. The house didn't encourage smiling. She cleaned the east wing first, then the kitchen, the 2 sitting rooms, the library. She made breakfast for children, Kang Seo-jun, age 9, and Kang Ha-eun, age 6, who waited for her at the kitchen island every morning like small, quiet satellites orbiting her warmth. "Mary, can you make the egg smiley faces again?" Ha-eun asked one morning, dangling her feet off the high stool. "Of course, baby." Mary cracked 2 eggs into the pan with the careful precision of someone who understood that small joys were the architecture of a child's memory. She shaped the yolks into eyes, a strip of red pepper into a smile. Ha-eun clapped. Seo-jun, older and more guarded, watched from the corner of his eye. He pretended not to care. But he always ate everything on his plate when Mary made breakfast. Their father did not eat breakfast with them. Kang Jae-won existed in the upper floors of his own estate, like a storm that hadn't decided yet where to land. Mary caught glimpses of him. The sweep of a dark suit disappearing around a corner, the rumble of his voice on a phone call behind closed doors, the particular silence that preceded his arrival, and the specific tension that lingered after he left. He was 34, broad-shouldered, with a jaw cut sharp enough to cast a shadow, dark eyes that never rested, and a stillness about him that wasn't peace. It was control. The kind of control that had been practiced so long it looked effortless. He had 3 rules for his household staff. Do your work. Do not engage him unless spoken to, and do not involve yourself with his children beyond assigned duties. Mary followed 2 of the 3 rules perfectly. The 3rd one she broke every single day, because Seo-jun and Ha-eun were lonely in a way that left marks, and she was constitutionally incapable of ignoring a child who needed someone to see them. She first heard Kang Jae-won's voice directly, not through walls or corridors, on a Wednesday afternoon in October. She had been on her knees in the hallway outside his study, cleaning a spill Ha-eun had made, when the study door opened without warning, and he stepped out with a phone pressed to his ear. He stopped when he saw her. She looked up. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. His dark eyes swept over her face with a kind of assessment that was habitual rather than personal, cataloging, classifying, dismissing. She felt the weight of it like a hand pressed briefly to her chest. "Move," he said. Not unkind, just absolute. She moved. He walked past without looking back, his voice already back on the phone, low and clipped. "Tell Chairman Lim that if a consignment doesn't arrive by Thursday, the consequences will be his problem, not mine." Mary sat back on her heels and let out a slow breath. She did not let herself think about the way his voice had dropped on the word consequences. She did not let herself notice the way the corridor smelled different after he passed. Cedar and something cold and clean, like autumn air. She picked up her cloth, wrung it out, and kept working. It happened without warning, as most cruelties do. It was a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the hallway incident. Mary was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer, lilies, because Ha-eun had asked for them, because they were her mother's favorite, and the little girl had been talking about her mother more that week. The children's mother, Shin Yuna, had died 2 years earlier, A car accident. The estate still carried the shape of her absence in every room. The front door opened. Kang Jae-won walked in from an early meeting. Two men flanking him. His expression in particular closed off blankness that meant something had gone wrong, and he was containing it. He stopped when he saw the lilies. His jaw tightened. Who authorized these flowers? Mary straightened. Haun asked for them, sir. She mentioned that. Take them out. Of course. She began gathering the stems. And pack your things. She stilled. I'm sorry. Your employment here is terminated. Effective today. Finance will send your final payment by the end of the week. He didn't look at her. He was already turning. Already moving toward the stairs. His two men following like shadows. May I ask why? Her voice was steady. She had worked very hard to make her voice steady. He paused on the second step. Didn't turn around. You don't need a reason. This is a private household. Gather your belongings. He continued up the stairs. She stood in the foyer with a bundle of lilies in her hands and the particular code of being dismissed without being seen. She did not cry. She had learned not to cry in front of people who had decided she wasn't worth an explanation. She found Seo-jun in the kitchen. He looked at her face and went very still the way children do when they understand that an adult is trying not to fall apart. Are you leaving? He asked. Yes, sweetheart. Did Appa, he stopped, pressed his lips together the way he pressed them together when he was trying to be older than 9. It's okay. She pulled him into a hug. He went rigid at first. The children were not accustomed to being held, and then folded against her like something that had been bracing for too long. You take care of your sister, okay? She looks up to you. Haun found him like that, and immediately began to cry with the full-body commitment of a 6-year-old, who doesn't yet know she isn't supposed to show how much she's hurting. Mary held them both and memorized the weight of it. Then she gathered her things and left the Kang estate. The apartment she found in Maple was small and let in the kind of winter light that felt apologetic. She had a new job, cleaning and light assistance at a private medical clinic in Hongdae, working for a Dr. Oh and his rotation of nurses who were uniformly kind and uniformly overworked. The pay was less than the Kang estate, but the hours were predictable and no one made her feel like a piece of furniture. She was building something. Slowly. Carefully. The way you build anything when you've had to start over enough times to understand that foundations matter more than walls. She thought about the children sometimes. More than sometimes. She did not think about their father. The call came on a Saturday morning in April. She almost didn't answer. The number was private, the kind that blocked itself deliberately, but something made her pick up. Miss Dees. The voice was professional, crisp, a woman. She didn't recognize it. This is Jisoo Park, personal assistant to Mr. Kang Jae-won. Mr. Kang would like to request a meeting with you. No, thank you, Mary said and hung up. The phone rang again 40 seconds later. Miss Dees, I heard you the first time. I understand, but if you would allow me to finish, this isn't about resuming employment. Mr. Kang's children have been in a significant decline since your departure, both academically and... That's not my responsibility. A pause. No, it isn't. But he's asking, not ordering. Asking. She stared at the water stain on her ceiling. Where? She said finally. He chose a cafe in Itaewon rather than his estate or his offices. She noticed that. A neutral space. An unusual choice for a man who, by all accounts, only operated from positions of maximum advantage. She arrived 5 minutes early and sat facing the door because she had learned to always sit facing the door. He arrived exactly on time. He looked different outside the estate, not smaller. Men like Kang Jae-won didn't look small in any context, but somehow more present. He wasn't wearing his usual armor suit jacket and controlled distance. It was a gray coat over a dark sweater, and his hands, when he sat down across from her, were bare. No phone, no aid, just him. He looked at her for a moment, and unlike every other time he had swept his gaze over her, this time it landed and stayed. You look well, he said. What do you want, Mr. Kang? He didn't flinch. My children are not sleeping. Seo-jun has been refusing to eat dinner. Haun had a panic episode at school last week. The counselor says they're experiencing a grief response that's been building since their mother's death, and your departure appears to have. He stopped, looked at the table. Something moved across his face that might have been discomfort in a man who had been trained to never be uncomfortable. You mattered to them. And yet you fired me without a reason. His jaw worked. I know. You didn't even look at me. I know. The silence between them was not comfortable. She let it stay uncomfortable. He had earned the discomfort. I'm not coming back as a maid, she said. I'm not asking you to. She studied him. Then what exactly are you asking? I want to hire you as a full-time caretaker. For the children, with a proper contract, proper terms, your own suite in the East Wing, and a salary that reflects the actual scope of the role, rather than a cleaning wage. He met her eyes directly for the first time. And I want to apologize for the way I handled your termination. Mary absorbed this. Why did you fire me? The question had clearly been sitting in his chest like a stone for 6 months. She watched him pick up and put down the answer twice before he said, quietly, the lilies. They were my wife's favorite. Seeing them in the foyer, he exhaled. I reacted badly and I took it out on the wrong person. She looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. I'll think about it, she said. She thought about it for 4 days. She thought about the children, who had done nothing wrong and were suffering for the sins of their father's grief. She thought about her small apartment in the apologetic winter light and the fact that she was, in truth, good at her job. Not the cleaning, but the children. The way she understood the particular silence of a lonely child. She called Jisoo on the 5th day. Tell him I'll come back, she said. But I want the terms in writing before I set foot in that house, and I want it clearly stated that my role is caretaker, not maid. I won't be cleaning floors. Understood, Jisoo said. And then, after a pause, he'll be relieved. He hasn't. Another pause. He'll be relieved. The children were waiting at the door. Haun launched herself forward with the full-body commitment she had put into her crying 6 months ago, and Mary caught her, laughing a little despite herself, pressing her nose into the little girl's hair. Seo-jun hung back. He was 10 now. A birthday had come and gone in her absence. His face was thinner. His eyes were careful in the way that children's eyes become careful when they've had too many things taken from them unexpectedly. Hi, Mary said. Hi, he said back. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, then took it and shook it very formally, and that solemn handshake cracked something open in her chest. I missed you, she told him quietly. Just for him. He nodded, looked away, but he didn't let go of her hand. Kang Jae-won stood at the top of the foyer stairs, watching all of this. She didn't look at him right away. When she did, he was very still. The way a man is still when he's feeling something he doesn't have a name for yet. He gave her a brief, formal nod. She gave him one back. The first week was professional. Careful. She established a daily rhythm with the children. School pickup, homework, dinner together in the kitchen, reading before bed. She redecorated their playroom slightly. Softer colors, bookshelves at their height, a small whiteboard where Haun could draw freely. She organized Seo-jun's textbooks and found that he was behind in math, not from inability but from distraction, and began sitting with him for an hour each evening to work through it. Kang Jae-won watched. She felt it, the way you feel observation is trying to be invisible, a shift in air, a sense of being weighted by attention. She didn't acknowledge it. She did her job, but she noticed things too, small things. The way he stood outside Seo-jun's room some nights, not entering, just listening to the low conversation between Mary and his son. The way he sometimes stood in the kitchen doorway at the end of the day with a glass of water and didn't drink it, just held it, watching the children laugh at something she'd said. The way his jaw softened, barely perceptibly, when Haun climbed into Mary's lap. He was starving for something and didn't know how to ask to be fed. The first time they had a real conversation, it was an accident. She had put the children to bed and was in the kitchen making herself tea when she turned and found him standing at the island, reading something on his phone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking like a man who had forgotten anyone else was in the room. He looked up. They both went still. Sorry, she said. I'll take this upstairs. You don't have to. He set the phone down. gestured vaguely at the kitchen. This is your space too. She considered leaving anyway. Then, because she was tired of navigating around him and tired of letting powerful men dictate her movements in spaces where she had equal right to exist, she went to the cabinet, got a second mug, and set it on the counter. Tea, she said. He blinked, like the word was in a language he was still translating. Yes, he said finally. They sat on opposite sides of the kitchen island with 2 mugs of green tea and particular silence of 2 people who had decided to occupy the same space honestly for the first time. She looked at the grain of the marble counter. He looked at his mug. Seo Jun solved the quadratic equations on his own today, she said. Something shifted in his face. He did. Sat there for 20 minutes without asking for help, and then just got it. You should have seen his face. She allowed herself a small smile. He tried to play it cool, but he was so proud of himself. Jae-won was quiet. Then, he never told me he was behind. He didn't want to disappoint you. The words landed. She watched him receive them, watched the very small, very controlled way that they hurt him. He's a lot like you, she added, more gently. Holds things in, handles things alone. Is that a criticism? It's an observation. He looked at her then, really looked, the full force of those dark eyes on her face, and she felt the same way she had felt his assessment in the hallway 14 months ago, except this time it wasn't dismissal. It was something that took inventory and found more than it had expected. You're very direct, he said. You employ a lot of people who aren't, she replied. I imagine it's occasionally refreshing. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something that remembered what a smile was. Occasionally, he said. His world had an outside and it leaked in. She learned this on a Friday evening when 3 black SUVs arrived at the gate and men in suits moved through the estate with the practiced coordination of a military operation. She gathered the children into the playroom, closed the door, and put on a movie without being asked. She had worked in this house long enough to understand that when the suits arrived, the children disappeared. She heard Ray's voices from the floor below, not clearly, but the tone was unmistakable. The particular pitch of men negotiating something that would have consequences. Later, after the SUVs left and the children were asleep, she found Jae-won in the hallway outside the playroom. He had a cut on the back of his hand that had been hastily bandaged. He was looking at the closed door the way he sometimes looked at his children, with an emotion too large and too unguarded to be comfortable for him. They're fine, she said quietly. Haun fell asleep during the movie. Seo Jun stayed up to finish it, but he's out now. He exhaled, long and slow, like releasing something pressurized. The man tonight, he started. You don't owe me explanations. I know. He looked at her. But I want you to understand that I keep this part of my life away from them. I know you do. She paused. You do it well, but it costs you. He stared at her. Holding 2 lives perfectly separate, she continued. The man downstairs and the father upstairs. It's exhausting. It's meant to be exhausting. And one day the wall between them will crack. His expression was unreadable. But something behind it was very readable indeed. It was the expression of a man who had just been told a truth he'd been circling for years. What would you suggest? He said finally. It wasn't rhetorical. He was actually asking. She thought about it honestly. Let them see a little more of you. Not the danger. Not the empire. Just you. Flawed, tired present. Children don't need perfect fathers. They need real ones. The silence stretched long enough that she thought she'd gone too far. I'll think about it, he said. She recognized the words. They were the same ones she had said to him in the cafe. He arrived on a Tuesday. Lee Hyun-soo was Jae-won's second in command. Tall, easing the way a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered to him, with a smile that arrived before the rest of his face and stayed longer than was necessary. He came to the estate for a meeting and ended up staying for dinner because Jae-won's housekeeper had prepared too much food and Seo Jun had, to everyone's apparent surprise, invited him. Mary served the food. Hyun-soo watched her with the kind of attention that was meant to be flattering and landed somewhere adjacent to intrusive. He found 3 separate reasons to talk to her during the meal, passing a dish, asking about the children's school, asking where she was from. Each question was perfectly reasonable. The cumulative weight of them was not. "You're very capable," he said, near the end of dinner, while she was clearing the side plates. He said it with the easy assurance of a man paying what he assumed was a compliment. "Thank you," she said, without warmth. "I meant it as a compliment." "I know." She moved back to the kitchen. From the table, J1 had watched all of this. She felt his attention shift in that particular way it had developed lately. Focused, heated, tracking. When she came back out to clear the main plates, she didn't look at him. She could feel the particular quality of his silence. Though, it was not the same silence as usual. After dinner, when Hyun-soo was preparing to leave, he found her in the hallway. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable earlier," he said. "You didn't," she said. "Good." He smiled. "Then maybe I could." Hyun-soo. J1's voice in the end of the hallway was very quiet and very even. The same voice he'd used on the phone call about the consignment. "The consequences will be his problem, not mine." Hyun-soo went still, turned. J1 was standing with his hands in his pockets. His expression was perfectly neutral. His eyes were not. "Your car's waiting," he said. Hyun-soo read something in his face that Mary couldn't read from where she was standing. He nodded, said a brief goodnight, and left. J1 didn't move immediately. He stood at the end of the hallway for a moment, and in that moment, if you were paying attention, and Mary was, you could see the thing he'd been concealing very carefully for weeks pressing against the surface. Then he turned and went upstairs. She stood in the hallway with a stack of cleared plates and understood very clearly that something had shifted between them that could not be shifted back. Spring moved through Seoul with the particular insistence of seasons that had been held back too long. The estate's garden opened up. Cherry trees along the east wall, a stretch of lawn that Haun immediately colonized as her personal performance stage. Something in J1 began to open with it. She noticed it in small increments. He started eating breakfast with the children on Sundays. Not every Sunday. His world didn't permit every Sunday. But some. He would sit at the kitchen island with his coffee while Haun talked to him about whatever had captured her imagination that week. And he would listen, really listen, with the focused attention he typically reserved for negotiations. He was learning to be present. It was visible, the way learning always is, slightly effortful, occasionally awkward, unmistakably real. Mary watched from the background and felt something in her own chest that she worked very diligently to name as professional satisfaction. It wasn't professional satisfaction. She knew that. She just wasn't ready to say it. The evening it became impossible to ignore. She was in the library, returning books the children had scattered. She hadn't heard him come in. He moved quietly for a large man, something she had cataloged about him the way you catalog things you try not to notice. He was standing at the window when she turned. A phone pressed to his ear. Speaking in rapid Korean, she only half followed. His back was to her. She should have left. She reached for the last book on the table, and in the motion, knocked over the small glass of water she'd set down earlier. It shattered on the marble floor. He turned. She was already crouching to pick up the pieces, reaching before she thought about it the way you do when something breaks near you. "Don't." He crossed the room in 4 steps, crouched beside her. His hand closed over hers. "You'll cut yourself." His hand was warm. The contact was brief, half a second, maybe less, before he released her and took the shard from near her fingers. But it was the kind of half-second that rewrites something. She sat back. He sat back. They were very close, on the library floor, with a broken glass between them. "I'll get the broom," she said. "Jisoo will." "I'll get the broom," she said again, more quietly. She stood and walked out of the library and stood in the hallway outside it for exactly 10 seconds with her hand pressed to her sternum, reminding herself of every reason this was not a road she was permitted to walk down. The power imbalance, the history, the fact that he had fired her without blinking and she had swallowed it, the fact that his children loved her and that was sacred, and the fastest way to destroy something sacred was to make it complicated. She was still listing the reasons when she went back in with the broom. He had already swept the glass into a neat pile in the corner, using a piece of cardstock from the desk. They looked at each other. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me in my own library," he said, and there was something almost dry in it. almost a joke, and the unexpectedness of it made her exhale a small laugh before she could stop herself. He watched her laugh. For just a moment, something moved across his face, open and unguarded and absolutely unintended, like a man who had just been handed something beautiful that he didn't know how to hold. She looked away first. Jisoo mentioned on a Wednesday. There was a charity gala at the Grand Hyatt on Friday, the kind of event that Kang Ji-won attended annually as a matter of political necessity. The children would stay at the estate with their nighttime caretaker. Mary nodded and made a note of the schedule. That should have been the end of it. On Thursday evening, she was helping Haun wash up when a little girl said with complete seriousness, "You should go to the party with Appa." Mary blinked. "What?" "He doesn't like going alone." Haun said this with the matter-of-fact authority of a child who has been watching adults for years and has formed her own opinions about them. He makes this face when he's alone at parties. She demonstrated a very subtle but accurate impression of Jae-won's controlled blankness expression. "I'm not. I told him he should ask you." Mary went very still. "Haun." He made the face, but a different face. Haun was unbothered, reaching for a toothbrush, the one he makes when he's thinking but doesn't want to say what. Mary processed this for a moment. "Sweetheart," she said carefully, "your father and I are friends," Haun said with confidence. "Seo Jun says you're just friends, but I think he's wrong." Mary did not respond to this. She helped Haun with her teeth, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and went to find a wall to lean against for a moment. He found her in the garden an hour later. She was sitting on the bench near the cherry trees with her cardigan pulled tight, looking at the sky. He stood at the garden door for a moment, then came and sat, not close, but close enough that the air between them was aware of itself. "Haun spoke to you," she said. "Haun speaks to everyone about everything," he said. "She's right that you make the face, though." "A beat? What face?" "The one that means you're thinking something you won't say." He was quiet for a moment. The night was cool, and the cherry blossoms were beginning to give way to leaves, the white fallen petals pale on the dark grass. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Then ask." "The gala tomorrow," he stopped, started again. "I would like you to attend with me. Not in any professional capacity. As my guest." He said it the same way he might authorize a weapons shipment, precise, certain, without visible vulnerability. But his hands, loosely clasped on his knees, were not as loose as he intended. She looked at those hands. "Why?" she asked. "Because I don't want to go alone," he said. "And because you're the only person I know who doesn't want anything from me." She turned to look at him fully. He looked back at her. In the pale light of the garden lamps, she could see the thing behind his eyes that he was always so carefully not showing, something that was not control, not authority. Not the cold precision of a man who ran an empire. Something older and quieter and entirely human. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear," she said finally. He exhaled, almost imperceptibly. "Jisoo will handle it." The dress Jisoo sent was the color of deep green, and it fit like it had been built for her. She stood in front of the mirror in her suite and felt, for a moment, like a version of herself she had been saving for something she hadn't named yet. When she came downstairs, Jae-won was at the foot of the stairs in a black tuxedo, one hand in his pocket, looking at his phone. He looked up when he heard her. His hand dropped. The phone dropped back into his pocket. He looked at her the way the library had looked at her when she'd laughed. "You look," he stopped, reconsidered, chose precision over sentiment. "We should go." But she had seen the half-second before the choice. She stored it carefully and said nothing. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was all crystal and candlelight, and a particular performance of wealth that Mary had glimpsed before only from the serving side of things. Tonight she was on the other side, and the difference was molecular. Jae-won moved through the room with the ease of a man who had been attended to his entire life, and she moved beside her with the ease of a woman who had learned to adapt to rooms that weren't built for her. People looked at them. She felt it, not hostility, mostly, but curiosity, the assessing kind. He placed his hand at the small of her back when navigating a cluster of guests, and she felt with a precision that was completely disproportionate to the gesture. "Breathe," he said quietly near her ear. "I am breathing," she replied, equally quiet. "Not properly." She almost laughed. He introduced her to 3 chairmen, 2 politicians, and a judge. He didn't introduce her as his caretaker or his employee or as anything, just her name, simply, with a hand still at her back, in a way that made his position entirely clear without saying a word. Park Tae-min arrived around 9. He was early 30s, effortlessly handsome in the Korean celebrity way, with easy charm and a laugh that carried across a room. He had apparently known Jae-won since university, and his smile when he found them near the bar was warm and uncomplicated. It became complicated approximately 4 minutes later, when Tae-min found reasons to speak primarily to Mary. He was charming. She could recognize charm without being moved by it. She was polite, engaging, appropriate. This did not matter to Jae-won. She felt it happen. The very precise moment when Jae-won's attention changed quality beside her. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. His hand, which had been resting near her elbow, pressed there more deliberately. Not hard, just present, just unmistakable. Mary's been invaluable with my children, Jae-won said, in the voice he used when he was annexing territory. It sounded like a compliment and functioned like a wall. Tae-min looked between them. His smile shifted just slightly, recalibrating. Of course, he said. He excused himself 7 minutes later with a warmth that never quite returned to its earlier temperature. Jae-won removed his hand from her elbow. She turned to look at him. That was unnecessary, she said. What was... You know what? He picked up his glass. He was flirting with you. People are allowed to be friendly. There's a difference between friendly and... Jae-won, his name. She'd used it, and they both registered that. He went very still. I was handling it. A long pause. I know, he said, and he actually sounded like he knew it, which was almost worse. I know you were. She looked at him for a moment. Are you going to tell me what that was? He looked back at her, and she could see him choosing, carefully, whether to be honest. No, he said finally. Then we should dance, she said. Because people are still looking at us, and you standing here looking like you're calculating casualties is not helping. The very slight way his expression shifted suggested he was genuinely surprised by her, which was, she thought, probably good for him. He set down his glass and offered her his hand. She took it. Dancing with Kang Jae-won was nothing like she had expected, which was saying something because she had spent considerable effort not expecting anything about him. He was a controlled dancer, precise, not showy, but there was something in the way he held her that was not controlled at all. His hand at her waist was steady and warm, and he kept a careful, proper distance that nonetheless felt like no distance whatsoever. You're tense, she observed. I'm not. You're very tense. This is what I look like when I'm relaxed. That explains a lot, actually. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. They were closer than she'd intended, and the music was slower than she'd noticed, and somewhere in the last 30 seconds the dance had stopped being about managing appearances and started being about something else entirely. His hand at her waist tightened, barely. She felt her breath change. This is not a road you're permitted to walk down, she reminded herself. Her own voice was considerably less convincing than it had been in the hallway outside the library. They drove home mostly in silence. A comfortable silence, almost, which was new. She looked out the window at the lit streets of Seoul, and he drove. She hadn't known he drove himself sometimes, without the security detail, with one hand on the wheel and the quiet focus of a man thinking about something specific. When they stopped at a light, he said, "Thank you for tonight. I should be thanking you." Why? She thought about it honestly. Because you looked at me like I belonged there. In that room. She paused. Most people don't do that. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you do belong there. You belong in any room you're in. He said it plainly, not as a compliment, as a statement of fact, as though it was something that should have been self-evident. She turned to look at him. The light changed. He drove. She turned back to the window, and in her chest, something she'd been holding at arm's length for weeks took a small, deliberate step closer. She told herself very firmly that nothing had changed. She was still the caretaker. He was still her employer. The gala had been a single evening, a practical arrangement that had been emotionally complicated by proximity and candlelight, and the unfortunate fact that Kang Jae-won, when he decided to be present, was devastatingly present. She returned to her routine with the precision of someone building a dam against a flood they can see coming. Monday, school pickup, homework, dinner, reading. Tuesday, the same. Wednesday, Seo Jun's math, Haun's drawing class, evening tea in the kitchen. She kept the kitchen tea to 30 minutes. She kept her word professional. She kept herself on her side of whatever invisible line she had drawn, and she was very careful not to look directly at him in the particular way that had become dangerous. He, for his part, seemed to be doing the same thing from the opposite direction. He stopped standing in doorways watching. He stopped appearing in the kitchen at the end of the day. He was polite at the few moments their paths crossed, precise, measured, courteous. The same man who had walked past in the hallway and said move and not look back. Except not entirely, because the man who had said move had not known her name. This man always looked back. She caught him looking on a Thursday afternoon when she was in the garden with Haun, helping the little girl plant seeds along the east fence. She looked up and found him at the window of his study, 2 floors up, a story of glass between them, watching with an expression she couldn't read at distance but felt completely, the way you feel weather changing. She looked down and pressed a seed into the soil. Haun said, "Mary, do you think flowers know when someone's watching them?" "I think they grow either way," Mary said. The call came through Jisoo on a Friday. A meeting had been scheduled. Rival faction. A man named Director Choi who ran competing operations in the Northern District and who had, in recent weeks, been making overtures at J1's inner circle classified as provocations. Mary knew none of this in detail. She knew the shape of it. The way she knew the shapes of most things in this house, by the shift in atmosphere, the quality of silences, the number of suits at the gate. What she didn't expect was to be involved. She was walking back from school pickup that afternoon. They took the same route every day, Seo Jun and Haun bickering amiably about something at her sides, when a black car slowed beside them on the quiet residential road. The window came down. A man she didn't know looked out. "Miss Adiz," he said. "Director Choi sends his regards. He'd like you to know that your position in the Kong household has been noted." She stopped walking, put her hands on both children's shoulders. "Keep walking," she said quietly to Seo Jun. He understood immediately. She felt the understanding pass through him, the way old understanding passes through children who've grown up adjacent to danger. He took Haun's hand and walked ahead. She turned back to the car. "Tell Director Choi he can address any messages to Mr. Kong directly." "Mr. Kong might find it more motivating," the man said pleasantly, "if the message arrived through you." The window went up. The car pulled away. She stood on the quiet road and watched it go and felt very clearly the sensation of being a piece on someone else's board. She told J1 that evening. She had intended to be brief and factual. She was brief. She was less factual than she intended, because when she finished describing the exchange, he was already on his feet, and the look on his face was not the face of an employer hearing a report. It was something older and more volatile than that. "The car," he said. "You saw the plate?" "Partial. Jisoo might be able to work with it." He was already at his phone. Then he stopped, put the phone down, turned back to her. "Are you all right?" The question was so direct and so unguarded that it caught her off balance. "I'm fine. The children are fine." Seo Jun was incredible, actually. He kept his head completely. Something moved across his face when she said that. Pride, pain, the particular ache of a father who is only learning now how strong his son has been in the absence of good instruction. "This won't happen again," Jae-won said. "That's not a promise you can make." "I'm making it anyway." His voice had dropped. The particular register of absolute conviction, the voice that had never in her experience left room for doubt. "I will not let anything happen to you or my children. Do you understand me?" She looked at him. "I understand you," she said quietly. He nodded. Something in his shoulders settled. Then he picked up the phone and made a series of calls in rapid Korean that she didn't follow, and she watched him become the other man. The operational one, cold and efficient and without sentiment, and she understood more clearly than ever that both of those men were completely real. He wasn't performing in either mode. He was simply whole, in the way that whole people are contradictory. The security tightened. Additional men at the gate. A different route for the school run, rotated every 2 days. Jae-won began arriving home earlier, not dramatically, not in any way he announced, but by 4 or 5 in the afternoon instead of 8 or 9, settling into the house with the deliberate quality of someone who has decided that a thing matters. The children noticed. They didn't say anything directly. They were too well trained in the language of not asking for what you need, but something in them shifted. Haun started saving pieces of her day to tell him at dinner. Seo-jun began leaving his homework on the kitchen island instead of doing it in his room, as if he was hoping for an audience. Jae-won sat with him one evening without being asked, working through a history essay with the focused attention he had brought to math, and Mary watched in the kitchen doorway and felt something so large move through her that she had to put a hand on the door frame. This was what it looked like, a family finding itself, imperfectly, haltingly, with all the scar tissue intact, but finding itself. She was part of it and not part of it. Both things were true. The storm broke on a Tuesday in late May. It had been raining since morning, the kind of heavy soul rain that made the streets gleam and kept everyone inside. The children were in bed. The estate was quiet. She was in the sitting room reading when she heard him come in from the rain, later than expected. The fall of his step carrying the particular weight of an evening that had not gone well. She should have gone to her suite. She didn't. He came through the sitting room on his way to the study and stopped when he saw her. He was damp, his collar loosened, a darkness in his expression that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite exhaustion, but was something that belonged to both. "The children are down," she said. "Thank you." He didn't move. She set down her book. "What happened?" "Nothing that involves you." "Something that involves you, then," she said, "which is concerning enough." He looked at her. The darkness in his expression shifted towards something more complicated. "Director Choi made a formal move tonight. We contained it. He stopped. "2 of my men were hurt. Badly. They'll recover." He ran a hand over his face, a gesture she had never seen from him before. The exhaustion showing through the control. "I've been managing this world for 12 years, and I have never—" He stopped again. "Never what?" He lowered his hand. His eyes found hers. "I have never stood in my own house and felt like what I was protecting was worth more than what it cost to protect it." The sentence moved through the room slowly, like something that had been traveling a long distance to arrive. She stood up. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. Close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. Close enough that the space between them was no longer a concept but a specific, measurable absence. "Your children are worth it," she said. "You know that." "I know." His voice had gone quiet. "I wasn't only talking about my children." The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was a fullness of everything that had been accumulated between them since the library, since the gala, since the garden and the kitchen tea, and every unfinished sentence and deliberately interrupted look. He lifted his hand and touched her face, just his fingers along her cheekbone, the kind of touch that asks a question, and she gave him the answer by not stepping back. "Mary," her name in his voice, not the formal misadis of hallways and professional transactions, just her name, like it was the only word he currently trusted himself with. "I know," she said softly, because she did know. She had known for a while. She had just been hoping it would go away, and it hadn't, and she was done pretending it would. He brought his forehead to hers. They stood like that in the quiet of the rain-dark sitting room. Not moving, not rushing, just finally in the same place at the same time with no pretense between them. When he kissed her, it was the way he did everything, deliberately, completely, without hedging. And she let herself be there, fully, without the distance she'd been so carefully maintaining. And let it be real, the rain fell, the house held them. The rest of the night belonged only to them. A threshold crossed, a warmth finally permitted, the careful undoing of walls that had been standing far too long. Nothing that happened needed witnesses. It was theirs. She woke before him. The room was gray with early light and the rain had stopped, and she lay still for a moment in the warmth of what had changed and felt it fully, the beauty of it and the terror of it arriving together, as they always do. Then the fear came, not of him, of the space after, of the morning, and what it would make of last night, whether it would be the beginning of something, or whether she would look at his face and see the polite recalibration of a man who had reached for something in a vulnerable moment and now needed to restore the appropriate distance. She had seen that face before on other men, in other situations where the power differential had reasserted itself with mourning. She couldn't bear to see it on him. She dressed quietly and went to her suite. She was composed by the time Haun knocked on her door at 7. She made the children breakfast. Smiley eggs. Haun clapped. Seo-jun ate everything on his plate. Jae-won came downstairs at 7:40 and stopped when he saw her at the stove. She turned to look at him. Her face was professional, warm with the children. Closed. She watched him read all of it. Something tightened in his jaw, but he said nothing, not with the children at the island. He poured his own coffee and sat, and the four of them had breakfast, and it looked, to any observer, like a completely ordinary morning. It was not an ordinary morning. She managed 3 days. 3 days of professionalism, of slightly too smooth transitions, of keeping conversations short and rooms large. He led her, which she noted. He didn't push, didn't corner her, didn't wield the authority he absolutely could have wielded. He was patient with a patience that was costing him something visible. On the third evening, she came downstairs to find him waiting in the hallway outside her suite, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and the particular stillness of a man who's been standing in one place long enough to have made a decision. "You're avoiding me," he said. "I've been busy." "Mary." She stopped. "What do you want to say?" "Whatever's actually true." He uncrossed his arms. He looked at her with the same directness he always had, but stripped of anything strategic. Just him. Just a question. Just the truth he was waiting for. Not the professional version. Not the safe version. She leaned against the wall opposite him. The hallway between them was narrow enough that they were still essentially in each other's space. "I'm afraid," she said. "Of what?" "Of being someone you reach for once and then put back." She said it levelly. She had rehearsed this because it was the kind of thing that needed to be said clearly to be survivable. Of being a comfort you needed one night and a complication the next morning. Of what this does to the children if it goes wrong. She stopped. "Of how much I've let this matter." He was quiet for a moment. "I fired you," he said slowly, "because Lily's reminded me of my wife and I wasn't looking at you when I did it. I was looking at something else entirely and I took out on a person who deserved none of it." He paused. "Then you came back, and I started looking at you and couldn't stop, and everything I thought I understood about what my life was rearranged itself around the fact of you being in it." He took a step toward her. "I'm not good at this. I'm aware of that. I know what I am, and I know what my world costs the people inside it. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. Another step, but I am asking you not to leave, not to perform being fine, so that I can ask. Just stay. Let me do this correctly this time." She looked up at him in the narrow hallway and felt the full weight of him, the power and the grief and the particular vulnerability of a man who was used to being feared, choosing instead be honest. "If you do this," she said quietly, "you do it completely, not in this house in private, while the rest of your world doesn't know I exist. I'm not something you keep secret, because it's convenient. You won't be secret," he said immediately. "I'll make that clear. And the children, whatever happens between us, cannot destabilize what we built with them. They come first. They always come first." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. He exhaled. That same long pressurized exhale she'd heard outside the study door during a crisis. The sound of something releasing. He reached out and took her hand and held it. Simply, carefully, the way Seo-jun had held her hand on the day she came back. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Haun's voice floated down the hallway. "Mary, I need water." They both breathed a laugh. He was not subtle about it. Within 2 weeks, she had been introduced, not as caretaker, not as an employee, to 3 of his closest allies, his personal lawyer and his mother, who arrived unannounced on a Thursday morning with the energy of a woman who had been waiting for this development and had thoughts about it. Kang Seon was 62 years old, elegant in the specific Korean way that treated elegance as a form of discipline, and she looked at Mary for approximately 45 seconds before she said, in careful English, "My son is not easy." "I know," Mary said. "He holds things in. He handles things alone." Mary recognized these words. She had said them herself months ago. I know. Soo-yeon studied her with the assessment of a woman who had been reading people for 6 decades. The children, she said. I love them, Mary said simply. Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. Then she said in Korean, something short that Mary didn't catch, and turned to find Jae-won in the doorway, and said something to him in the same tone, and walked past him into the kitchen. Jae-won came to stand beside Mary. What did she say? Mary asked. She said your Korean needs work. And the corner of his mouth. And she said I should not ruin this. Director Choi made his second move 3 weeks later. Not on the children this time. On Mary directly. She was leaving the medical clinic in Hongdae. She had kept 1 day a week there by choice because she valued work that was hers independent of the Kong world. When 2 men stepped out of a car, not threatening, overtly, just present and positioned and deliberate. She called Jae-won without hesitation. He answered on the second ring. She told him where she was and what she was looking at, and his voice on the phone was calm in a way that preceded the opposite of calm. Walk back inside the clinic. Lock yourself in Dr. O's office. Don't come out until I call you back. Jae-won, please. He rarely said please. It landed differently because of it. Please, Mary. Go inside. She went inside. 11 minutes later, his car pulled up. He came to the clinic door with 2 of his men, and the expression of someone who had crossed the city at inadvisable speed and was managing the relief of finding her intact with great effort. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the room and pulled her in, just his arms around her, her face against his shoulder, his hand at the back of her head. And he stood there breathing, and she let him, because she understood that this was the language of a man who was used to losing things and needed to physically confirm that this had not been another instance of that. I'm okay, she said into his shoulder. I know. He didn't let go. Jae-won, I'm okay. I know. Still didn't let go. She let him hold on. He went after Choi that night. She didn't ask for details. He didn't offer them. What she knew was that he was gone until 3 in the morning and came back with all the tension of a man who had solved the problem definitively. He came to her door, knocked, which she noted, which she stored, because it mattered, and when she opened it, he just looked at her with the tiredness of it all showing plainly on his face. It's handled, he said. Are your men okay? Yes. Are you? He leaned in the doorway, head tilted against a frame, and looked at her with the open exhaustion she'd first seen in the sitting room during the storm. I am, he said, because I'm standing here. She stepped back from the door. He came in. Summer arrived in Seoul the way it always did, suddenly, completely, without negotiating. The estate's garden reached its full abundance. Haun's planted seeds produced small, determined flowers along the east fence. Seo-jun made the math honor roll. The household had a different quality now, not louder. Jae-won was still constitutionally opposed to noise, but warmer, in the way that warmth is distinct from temperature, like the difference between a space that has been heated and a space that has learned to hold heat. She walked through it and felt, with a clarity that had taken nearly a year to earn, that she had built something here, not been placed, not assigned, not employed, built, with her hands and her patience and her refusal to make herself smaller, to fit the shape of someone else's convenience. Jae-won watched her walk through it. He had developed. She had noticed an entire secondary vocabulary of watching. The way he positioned himself in rooms she was likely to pass through. The way he tracked her in a gathering. Not obtrusively, not possessively in the consuming sense, but the way you track something you've learned is precious. The way you keep an eye on what you cannot afford to lose. She had stopped pretending she didn't notice. She let herself be noticed. He proposed in the garden. Not at a restaurant. Not at a grand event. Not with any audience. It was a Sunday afternoon. Haun and Seo-jun were chasing each other through the grass in a particular way that only children and people who have decided to be joyful can chase each other. And she was watching them from a bench near the cherry trees. And he came and sat beside her the way he'd sat beside her the evening of the gala proposal. Not close, but close enough. He didn't produce a box first. He talked to her. He said, I've been thinking about the kind of life I want. Not the kind I built. The kind I want. The distinction matters. He looked at the children on the lawn. I want them to grow up in a house where they understand what it looks like when 2 people choose each other honestly. I want them to have a mother who sees them the way you see them, which is fully, without conditions. He turned to her. I want to be the man I'm still learning to be, and I want to do it with you watching, because you're honest, and I don't have enough of that around me. He paused, produced a box from his jacket pocket, opened it. A ring, not ostentatious, exactly her proportion, which many had thought about her specifically, not about the gesture. Marry me, not because I need you to manage my household, because I love you and I'm not going to be manageable without you. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She looked at the children, who had both gone suspiciously still in the middle of the lawn and were watching with poorly concealed desperation. Haun, Mary called. Did you know about this? Haun immediately clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the sky. Mary laughed. She laughed fully, from somewhere in her chest that had been holding the specific warmth for a long time, and she heard Seo-jun say, Appa, she's laughing, is that good? And Jae-won say quietly, yes, that's good. She turned back to him. His expression was unguarded in the way it had become in private. All the control still there, but held loosely, the way you hold something when you're not afraid of it anymore. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her hand, and she felt the weight of it settle like a decision made properly, at last, by both of them at once. Haun screamed with delight and launched herself at them. Seo-jun walked across the lawn with great dignity, and then also launched himself, which he would later deny if asked. Jae-won sat in the middle of all of them with the expression of a man who had been holding something fragile in the dark for a very long time and had finally been permitted to put it down in the light. The wedding was small by the standards of a man like Kang Jae-won, which meant it was still beautiful enough to make Jisoo cry 3 separate times during the planning process. 40 guests. The estate garden, strung with lights. Haun as flower girl, solemn and deliberate, placing petals with the precision of a child who understood this was important. Seo-jun beside his father as the youngest best man in the history of the Kang family line, wearing a suit that made him look disturbingly like his father and carry himself with new steadiness. A boy who had been given back something essential, who had watched his father learn to be present, and had let it teach him something about himself. Soo-yeon cried during the vows and pretended she hadn't. Mary wore ivory. She walked in alone, which was her choice. She had people who mattered to her watching from the seated rows. Her sister who had flown from Lagos, Dr. Oh and 2 of the clinic nurses, Jisoo who had transitioned from assistant to something closer to friend. She walked through all of them and found Jae-won at the end of the aisle looking at her with the same expression he'd had at the bottom of the stairs the night of the gala, that unintended open look, the one that had come before the choice. Except now he wasn't choosing to close it. He let her see it. She walked to him and took his hands, and the officiant said the things officiants say, and she heard none of it clearly because she was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and between them was everything that had survived to arrive here. The firing, the months of absence, the return, the storm, the danger, the learning and the softening, and the choosing again. I do, she said. I do, he said, without a pause, without ceremony in his voice. Just the same precision he brought to everything, except warmer, the way he'd become warmer, incrementally, since she came back. Haun whispered loudly to Seo-jun, I told you. Seo-jun whispered back, you were right, which cost him something. 8 months later, she stood in the bathroom of what had become their bedroom. An easy fusion over time, her things and his, her warmth against the severity, a room that had learned to hold both, and looked at the small white test in her hand. 2 lines. She sat down on the edge of the tub. She sat there for a while. Then she went to find him. He was in the study, which was where he always was on Sunday mornings before the children woke up, reading something, a coffee growing cold beside him. He looked up when she came in. Read her face immediately, the way he had become expert at reading her face. He stood. She showed him the test without speaking. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her, and something crossed his face that she had no word for. Not joy exactly, though it was that, and not relief, though it was that too. It was the look of a man whose life has been restored to him piece by piece over a long and difficult course of time, and who has just received the final piece and understood, now, that the picture is whole. He crossed the room and took her face in his hands. Mary, he said. I know, she said. He kissed her forehead, her temple, held her against his chest with the same arms that had held her in the clinic doorway, the same arms that had reached for her in the sitting room during the storm. Except that was borrowed time, and this was not. This was built time. Earned. Downstairs, they heard Hone's voice. Appa, CO June took my marker. I did not. You literally. That's not what literally means. J1 exhaled against the top of Mary's head. She felt the exhale warm and quiet with the sound of two children bickering below. Are you ready? She asked. He pulled back just enough to look at her. I've been ready, he said. Since the morning I understood what I'd lost when I let you go. He pressed his thumb gently along her cheekbone, his eyes steady and unhurried. I spent 6 months earning the right to ask you back. I spent a year earning the right to keep you. I'll spend the rest of my life earning the right to deserve what this is. She looked at him. Then she took his hand and led him out of the study. And together they went downstairs to the noise and the warmth and the beautiful, ordinary chaos of a family that had been broken and had chosen, deliberately and at great cost, to become whole. The Kong family had begun with loss. It ended, or rather, it truly began, with a woman who refused to be invisible, a man who learned to look, two children who had asked for the only thing that could save all of them, and a love that had been built carefully in the space between who they were and who they were capable of becoming. Haun was right. She usually was. Thank you for watching Afrokorea TV. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. A new story is always waiting for you here.